am thrilled to have you on the show today. And so before we even get started about what we're going to be talking about today, Mari, I'd love for you to just share with us a little bit about yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to be doing what you're doing today.
My name is Mari Grande, and actually I'm originally from California. I was born there. I want to say I was raised, but in between, as I was being raised, we moved to Greece for a couple of years because I'm Greek. So I went to Greek school and I had that whole experience.
As am I. So there's a common
Right.
thing right away, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well,
That
what a
happens
synchronistic
often.
thing. And I didn't know that when I invited you on the show. So it's really funny.
I came back to America. I did my education. I did a couple undergraduate degrees, and then I decided to go to Greece. At the time, my family was there, so I was going to go there for a summer, and it ended up being 5 years because I started meeting people and connected with people, and then I had this accident which kind of derailed me, and it derailed me into a direction that I think that I really needed to go. So I was an artist. I was going to become an artist, and I was practicing artist. And after the accident, part of my healing included art therapy.
Oh,
And so that connected me to my creative process in a deeper way, because I almost lost my life. And
wow.
so it's like starting from scratch again.
How old
Um,
were you at the time?
I was 30 when it
Wow.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and it took several years to recover. I had to learn basically everything all over again. And that set me on a course to, again, I switching from art to art therapy. So I came back to America. I studied art therapy, and I also studied my fine arts because I couldn't let it go. And then I moved into clinical social work, and then I started a private practice. And in between there, I was working in the schools, and I was working with traumatized children and families. And that kind of got me in that mode of thinking about trauma, not only physical, but emotional and relational. And then when I developed my private practice, by then I was in New York City, and I fell in love with New York and the people, um, and my husband, and everything set into
It makes a
place. So
difference, right?
yeah. So I set myself up and with private practice, and then I started meeting so many people talking about these parental problems, especially the mother. And there was this theme. And then I had this one woman in particular that had this theme around the mother said to me, she says, "Can't you find me a group for daughters of critical mothers?"
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, sure." And so I looked and I looked and was like, "Oh my God, there isn't any." So I had all these, it's mostly women that kept on coming to me with this issue. So um, I asked them if they were interested in joining, and everyone said, "Yeah, yeah." That's how the
Wow.
therapy group began.
What a transformational story. So obviously something led you there, something your own
Right.
experience led you there. I will tell you what was intriguing to me, and one of the reasons why I invited you on the show is because you recently wrote a book about overcoming the mother wound,
Yeah.
right? And I was fascinated because like you, I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I do a lot of executive coaching, and in my work, there are so many conversations about the critical voice in our head, et cetera. And then as we peel it back, people start talking about, well, my mother X. And so it's not the mother bashing type of show. So
Right.
that's not what we're talking about. But we're trying to look at, okay, what are some of the unconscious things that are in our head that have impacted us? And especially I wanted to talk to you because you talk a lot about this concept, right? About the mother. So can you talk a little bit about what this is?
So also to say that this group that was for women evolved into more because the more people wanted to join, and we were already formed. So I said, well, let me develop a course so people get oriented to what we're doing and then join the group. So that was going on for a while. And then I had people saying, I really want to come, and I'm a man. Can you come in? So I said, okay, let me open it up. So I decided, the mother wound does not just happen to women. So I changed that into the overcoming the mother wound because it wasn't so finite with
Right.
daughters of critical mothers. And so in doing so, in forming the course and trying to explain it all, I developed types, types of wounds that happen. And I also, because I rely a lot on attachment theory, I explain what happens in attachment.
Can you give us a little tutorial or very quick primer
Sure.
on what that is so that people understand what we're talking about?
I rely on John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth theories, and they came up with four main types. There's the secure, which means you got good enough parenting. And it turns out the good enough parenting means giving 30% of your time fully to that child, only 30%. And amazingly, so many people don't even get that because 30% means you're full on attention. Like, I hear you, I see you being felt, being seen, being responded to. All that is the secure, doesn't mean perfect, but just good enough. And then we have the anxious. The anxious usually comes with like fear of abandonment, relying on external supports, for validation. And then there's the avoidant, and they usually just depend on themselves because they've had to do that because there hasn't been a reliable parental figure. And then there's disorganized. So secure, anxious, avoidant, disorganized. And disorganized is sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. What is scary is also what's comforting. It's very confusing. So it creates an internal disorganization, not being able to trust. All of these affect us in knowing, like having our inner Geiger counter, like we can't gauge. And that's the deepest.
So those are the styles that manifest from a certain type of parenting. For example, if I have a insecure attachment style, what was the type of parenting I was receiving? So then that manifests for me unconsciously.
Like I said, there's three types of insecure attachments.
Right.
It's the anxious, avoidant, and disorganized.
Right.
And that could happen because there is inconsistency.
Mhm.
There is someone like a mental illness, or someone's physically ill, or there's a premature death, there's a trauma, there's even sibling, some might be a sibling that is ill or needs a special attention. There's all kinds of things that can disrupt that attachment process.
Right.
That's especially critical the first few years. And then it becomes something, and then it usually gets repeated again in adolescence.
Right. So can you give us an example of what that would look like and then how that manifests as an adult? So if I received what kind of parenting? So I'll give an example. So my mother, right? So I'll hope she's not listening to this, but very critical mother. Also was struggling with a lot of her own mental trauma, from her childhood. And so her parenting style was very, clingy and then detach, clingy and then detach. It's incredibly critical, incredibly critical, and expecting the child to be the parent rather than the parent being the child, right? That manifests in not knowing, okay, what is going to be, I mean, all of us have moods or whatever, but that was an inconsistent style constantly. How you grow up then is not really knowing, is this love conditional, or is it because I'm being perfect? Is it because I'm being good? And I have to be a certain way in order for me to be validated and to feel loved, right? So then that creates for me, right, an insecure attachment. So I'm insecure. And so then that would relate to me unconsciously as an adult. I would be insecure in my relationships. I would be seeking external validation. I would have a critical voice, all of those things based on, and it's not that the person was a bad person. My mom was not a bad person.
Right.
She was dealing with her own stuff that then unconsciously got transferred to me. Right. So that's an example for me, a real example of what you're talking about. I'm assuming
Right.
that's what you're
Yeah,
talking about.
no, that was excellent. And actually, it illustrates how it's not so clean because sounds like it's primarily avoidant, but there's a lot of anxious and some disorganized.
Right.
So it's not so clean. So that, yeah, so that you really got the prize there. I mean, obviously there was something that you got that was consistent, and it probably was unconscious, and it could have been through an aunt, a grandparent, a father,
A godmother.
something consistent that allowed attachment, a consistent attachment to form, so that you're able to step back and say, oh, I didn't get this, I didn't get that, but you're able to have some distance and some reflection on that.
What would you say? I mean, you wrote a book, Overcoming the Mother Wound, so you've obviously done a lot of research on that. What would you say to them, and what are your thoughts on that?
When we develop, we are born with millions of neurons and networks, and they're not connecting. And the way they connect is through the relationship. So you're basically born a bit of a blank slate. I mean, I believe you have a soul, but still your brain isn't making sense of things. It's the other person that helps you wire your brain. So when you smile and someone smiles back at you, you go, oh, that's me. And that creates a connection to yourself. If you're smiling and then they say, oh, they have gas and pick you up and start patting you, right there, something as simple as that, it seems benign, but it confuses the system, the nervous system. So these things are so deep and so unconscious. And that's even before you become a toddler. You're already starting to wire our brains and our inner relationships. I think that the unconscious is very powerful, and the unconscious is in the body. So if the leg may feel a lot of things in your body. I find that when you're not attending to that, illness can happen or dysfunction can happen. So I'm of the position that it's all connected.
So there's the mind connection. What about the emotional connection in your other relationships? So if you're going out and you're forming your own relationships, or you're a leader, how would this impact you that way in how you interact with others?
Without that strong connections to yourself, it's really hard to gauge what you need and what's important to you. And that can manifest in self-doubt. It can manifest in perfectionism, whatever, you're trying to do something external to try to fill this, and it's never enough, and you don't know when it's enough, and you don't know it's too much. And something is really important to talk about, the window of tolerance. I don't know if you're used to that
No,
term.
go ahead. Talk to us about
That that's something Dan Siegel
it. Mm,
developed. And we all have a window. This is the top and this is the bottom. This is this theory, and that we have a sympathetic nervous system that gets us up in the morning, and a parasympathetic that helps us rest and digest. And a nice, healthy nervous system is doing this all the time. It's not like we're flat. We don't want to be flat. So when we get upset, we can get upset and get energized, and then okay, and then take a breath, take a beat, and you calm down. When you're feeling dysregulated, you can get upset, like something can really bother you. Someone like, oh, that person, they talk too loud, and I don't like their voice, and you're out of your window. Just something and now when you're out of your window, it means your brain flips. You're not in your thinking brain. You're in a state of hyper arousal. And so you can't think, you can't really feel your body, you're not connected, you're no longer socially engaged. You're just in your own mind. On the other end, if it's too much and your inclination is to collapse, you go too far into the parasympathetic, and that's where you dissociate, you can't get out of bed, you have a foggy brain. And there's different levels, you could be this far down or this far down. You can this far up or this far up.
wow.
So when you have, like, usually if with a mother wound, you can have a very tiny window. So it doesn't take much to pop out.
Mm,
Like in the book, in my course, I really want to stretch that window. And that's why I also use a lot of embodied approaches, because unless the body's involved, the mind's just going to do its thing. It may think it's learning something, but it's just repeating something. So we have to be, that's why embodied approaches are so important when you're working with the mother wound.
What are you trying to do when you are doing that, when you're overcoming the mother wound? So let's say I have this dysregulation, or I recognize some of the things that you're saying, that, I'm listening, and I have over perfectionism, or I have self-doubt, and I'm saying, oh wow, that some of that may be caused by the way I was socialized by my mother or by my parents, etc. What can someone do? And you just gave us an example, but if you can be a little more specific to overcome that, other than read your book, which we will link on that, right? But what can you give us an example of an exercise or something someone could do that would help them?
Yeah, I have a lot of exercises in the book, because I don't think that just reading about something intellectually is going to help you work through anything. So the book can be kind of challenging. That's why I have also a membership, like a community, because just like the group, it really makes a difference when you have another person that that's sharing that experience or can give you feedback on that experience. And just like a mother wound is not developed on its own, it's in relationship to something else. So it's so important to have that relationship. But even before that, like in the book, I have a lot of exercises that build on your relationship to yourself. So a lot of that includes like noticing things. I start the book off with assessment to get like, where are you? And some people like stop there, like, oh my God, and that's too bad because that's just the beginning. So I try to intermix some resourcing, which is developing supports what inside of you and developing supports, acknowledging the supports that you have outside of yourself. So in the book, or in the course as well, there's a lot of guided meditations to calm the nervous system so that you can go to more challenging elements. I know I work a lot with the mandala because the mandala is very grounding, and it's also, it's ourself. And so we can, it's almost like the womb, even though I don't say that, it's symbolically, you're working with something that feels like that mothering, holding experience. And so, for instance, with one of the exercises in the using the mandala would be to put inside the circle the things that you value. And then it could be just, it's almost like a gratitude list.
Mhm.
But I ask you to do it in words help, but if you can find images in a magazine or draw, and you don't have to be a master, but just something about making it visual instead of just using your left brain all the time, can kind of do some shifts in your, and actually there's some brain science around that you do calm the amygdala and the limbic system. So it does help regulate if you're able to do some drawing or even finding images, cutting them out of the magazines and pasting them into the circle or drawing them in the circle. And then on the outside, you can put the things that are stressing you out or the things that you want far away. It could be a person, it could be something at work, it could be, your child.
Mhm.
But just to put and then really thicken that line if you feel like you need that separation. And then simply looking at it and being with it and allowing your mirror neurons, which is part of your unconscious, to take in and absorb, like, okay, this is what feels good, and this is outside of me, and really help separate, because a lot of things are so globbed together that we need to parse them out.
Yeah.
And we need to bring some intentionality into that process.
What a wonderful exercise. And for the listeners who don't know what a mandala is,
Mandala is actually the Sanskrit word for circle. And it's used often in meditation to focus. And I'm really curious what your understanding of the mandala is as well.
I think the same as what you said, it's a circle. I think part of what I picture it as, it's almost as the circle is a sacred womb
Mm,
on some level, right? It represents exactly what you said. It's almost like the womb. It's a sacred circle. And
yeah,
so I love that exercise, because what you're saying is, how do I rewire my internal unconscious? I'm rewiring that on
yeah,
some level, um, and create that sacred space for myself. It's almost like
exactly.
a
Yes.
remothering, on some level, is what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you say, right?
Yeah. And I think that is a lot of the sense of my book. It is very supportive. And because this, and some may find, oh, this is so soft. That's not gonna heal my wound. But that's exactly what we need. We need that. We need to allow some softness. We need to allow some surrender. We need to allow some time and space, because what what else is it for? Because unless we can set aside some time to do this work, that it's just not going to happen.
As you talk, Maria, what I hear is healing. And I think that's part of what you're alluding to as you talk about these things, is the self-healing piece. And often, and especially some of the listeners that are listening today, who are leaders in organizations, who are used to go, go, go. I've got to get stuff done. I don't have time for this. Um, and self-reflection sounds great, but I don't have time for it. At What would you say to them about that?
Well, first of all, I went, there's a spoiler alert here in that everybody has a mother. There's no escaping it. It's the degree it exists and the degree that it's impacting your life. Um, and so it's important to acknowledge its presence. And if, like, yeah, if you're not able to take the time to do this, um, time is a problem, because I wish I had something simpler to say, but I think that um, there needs to be time and attention to this. I know that there's more like intensive retreats that can really push things up. But it's important, if those things are pushed up, to really have the space and time to process them. And again, it depends on your wound. Some wounds are really horrific and have a lot of abuse, physical, emotional, sexual. Some wounds are more disorganizing, more soul sucking, but benign on the outside. Like that nothing happened to you. Your family's fantastic. What's your problem?
Mhm.
You know? And those are really that's really hard to overcome, because you have all these messages saying that your life was so great and you have these great parents. What is your problem? But that something was missed, that there's been this misattunement that touches your deepest being.
It's really just, giving people thoughts about why this is important to do, because I know these types of things, sometimes are seen as, and I've heard it before, kumbaya, I would just get over it, you're fine. Look at, I'm successful, I'm doing all of these things. And what I see, and so I'll share with you what I see in my work, working in large organizations with executives all the time, is that these type of things come up, and how they come up, and how they manifest is in behavior, and in behavior in relationships, in how they regulate emotions,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or not regulate emotions, like losing it at your team. If something triggers you, and you go off on your team, and it's like, oh, why did I say that? And then
Right.
it constantly trying to be different, but yet not understanding why I keep exploding. It comes out in behavior, sometimes even abusive behavior of their employees. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
that. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
part of these types of things, or in over perfectionism, constantly beating themselves up, critical, lack of confidence. I mean, there's so many different things, and I'm not saying it's all related to what you're talking about.
Right, right.
Some of that self introspection can help heal whatever some of these things are. And what you're offering us today is, hey, there's this piece of this that you
Mhm.
might want to look at, and I have tools
Right.
to help you overcome that. That's what I'm hearing.
Yes, yes. And I'm also hearing when you're talking, like I have a couple thoughts about what you
Yeah,
just said.
yeah.
And you're kind of bringing up um, the masculine,
Mhm.
how it's the, get over it, move on, put your boots on. That's a very, how we've been running the show,
Right.
so masculine and do it, very singular. And overcoming and really accepting the mother wound and understanding it and appreciating it, because there's so much nuance and um, depth to really unpacking the wound. And another thing I want to say is in preparation for coming here, I thought of what are the important characteristics of leaderships, of leaders. And I thought, so I'm going to make a list.
Yeah.
There's to be authentic,
Well,
to be adaptable, curious, communicative, creative, decisive, empathic, self-aware, and resilient.
mm,
So with all those, if there's a mother wound, I think of having authenticity, well, there's usually a need to hide with the mother wound. Being
mm.
adaptable, they tend to be kind of rigid and controlling with the
Hold on
wound.
for that. Can you stop on that one? Because I think that's so important what you just said. And we'll go through this list because it's really, really, really poignant. The need to hide.
Mm.
Can you say more about that?
Oh,
Because
um,
that's very profound.
yeah, yeah. It wasn't it. You were never seen for you. So you, similar to like Winnicott talks about the false self. It's a lot in line with that, but it has a certain um, pain in it, and that you need to, it's not okay to be you.
Mm,
And so constantly like putting on a certain persona, um, pumping yourself up, because if you were just you, then you might be criticized, you might be ridiculed, you might be dismissed, you might have been, yeah, it just goes on and on. So yeah.
that's very profound. And I think that's a huge piece of the self-discovery process that you talk about.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'm sorry to keep going. Yeah. Just wanted to
And
highlight that for people.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
important. Yeah.
it is really important. Thank you for pausing me. Um, and yes, the adaptability of a leader, and usually if there's a mother wound, there's like a control piece. You being rigid, like not trusting yourself. Um, being curious is real important to find out what's going on within your company, with your um, teammates, with your employees. And that means, if you're really afraid of the truth, then you can't allow for curiosity to happen.
Mm,
Um, and of course, being communicative. And if you're very restricted, if you have a live and active mother wound, it's hard to communicate because everything you have to you're double checking yourself, double thinking yourself. So that self-doubt element comes in. It's hard to be creative because to come up with new ideas and be spontaneous because you tend to be blocked. And with decisiveness, like, yeah, just make decisions. There's so much self-doubt and indecisiveness because, well, if I do that, then that could happen. Wanting to be perfect, so you can't make a decision. So that runs into the perfectionist piece. And empathy, being empathic is just not always available. There's usually too much self-involvement, and self-involvement is different than self-reflection. Like this self-criticism, I'm doing this wrong, I know what I do. It's not safe enough to be empathic, to give of yourself.
mm.
Um,
Can you say more about that? It's not safe to give of yourself to be empathic.
yeah, yeah. And what's really interesting is like in my groups, I know that individually these people are not able to be empathic to themselves, but in the group, they are so kind and understanding of the others,
Mhm.
but they're not able to do it themselves. And these are people working on their mother wounds. Without that, like, um, awareness, there tends to be like a certain kind of what you were describing, some of these leaders, like, well, just put your bootstraps on and go with it. Even though this person is suffering, something might have happened to them, or that there is a mistake that they blew out of proportion, but there's not an access to empathy. Um,
Yeah, I just think that there's so much more to unpack there. If we had time,
I know.
that's a huge one, because that empathy, like you just said, if you're not showing it to yourself, it's hard to access that. And then there's the whole notion that we didn't even touch upon of shame, that we didn't. I know there's a piece of that in all of this conversation of feeling a shame and what that does to people. Also that false bravado and all of those sorts of things. So I want to thank you for taking the time to spend some time with us to talk a little bit about this really important topic. And for those of you listening who are like, I don't get it. I would really, and I don't advertise books on this podcast. I talk about books, but I don't encourage you, but I encourage you to take a look at this, because it is a little deeper than what perhaps we're used to doing. And it really impacts, in my opinion, it impacts the whole notion of what we always talk about in leadership is self-mastery. And part of that is getting in touch with yourself internally. But any other parting words of wisdom that you'd like to leave this audience today?
First, I want to thank you for having me, and being so open with me as well. But yes, I really want to say that, to let you know that nothing is wrong with you. It's okay to be vulnerable, and it's okay to learn new things. And healing is a lifelong journey. And it just gets better and better. And mother wounds can be sexy when you work through them. And we learn about parts of ourselves that that are courageous and wise and powerful. And yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Thank you. I appreciate your wisdom, and I feel like I was just in the presence of a wise woman today. So I appreciate you being here.
thank you.